Lads and ladies, welcome to the Junior Classics.
Hi there, I'm Sir Bradley Hasse, a teller of borrowed tales. Join me as I share stories of courage, adventure, and wonder. But don't take my word for it. You can find out for yourself on today's Junior Classic.
And this spell I lay upon you.
2 are gone, and only 1 is left.
When I yawn a little, I am a troll altogether.
Greetings, Junior Scholars. I am Sir Bradley Hasse, guardian of the written word and your guide through the Junior Classics. Our mission is to safeguard the classics and inspire children to a love of good reading and a real and lasting interest in Western literature and history. If this is your first time listening, thank you for joining us, and a very special thank you to my loyal listeners who tune in each and every episode, especially my Patreon supporters who help keep the show going and growing. If you like what we are doing, creating stories for the good of your kids, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can also write me a letter at P.O. Box 1153, Crown Point, Indiana 46308. And if you write me a letter telling me what story you liked, what you liked about it, or ask me any questions, in return I will send you some super cool Junior Classic bookmarks in the mail. Today, we complete our series Tales from the Norselands with the story The Witch in the Stone Boat. And this has been my favorite so far. But before we get to today's tale,
Lost and found words!
listen carefully to these words and their meanings and try and spot them during the story. Our first word is averse with an A, averse. Averse means a strong dislike to something. What are you averse to? Our second word is haughty with an H, haughty. Haughty means to be arrogant, prideful, one who acts high and mighty. Can you think of someone who acts haughty? Our third word is hewed. Hewed means to chop or cut something with an axe, pick, or any type of tool. Our fourth word is asunder with an A, asunder. This means apart or divided. And our last word is dignity. Dignity means being worthy of honor or respect. So you should treat your parents and those in authority with dignity. That's all for today's Lost and Found Words. Now on to the show. In today's tale, a witch or troll wife enters our story rowing a stone boat. A stone boat floating on water is mysterious indeed. Stone boats, however, are not just found in fairy tales and legends. Strange formations of stones have been discovered in the Norse regions, mystifying all who gaze upon them. They are shaped in a pattern that resembles ships, but these vessels were settled on grass instead of water. They remind one of legendary boats, which possibly were believed to carry bodies to the afterlife. Since they were first discovered, the stone ships were seen as a form of a tomb. The symbol of the boat is one of the most popular ways to depict travel to the afterlife, and it is found in many cultures around the world. Researchers believe that in the Baltic Sea region, the stone ships were part of important ceremonies. Some of them were certainly related to funerals, but other functions are unknown. Some people believe they are special places of power. Whatever the case, the stone ships are some of the most fascinating stone constructions in the Norselands. The Witch in the Stone Boat, retold by Andrew Lang. There was once a king and queen, and they had a son called Sigurd, who was very strong and active and good-looking. When the king came to be bowed down with the weight of years, he spoke to his son and said that now it was time for him to look out for a fitting match for himself, for he did not know how long he might last now, and he would like to see him married before he died. Sigurd was not adverse to this, and asked his father where he thought it best to look for a wife. The king answered that in a certain country there was a king who had a beautiful daughter, and he thought it would be most desirable if Sigurd could get her. So the two parted, and Sigurd prepared for the journey and went to where his father had directed him. He came to the king and asked his daughter's hand, which was readily granted him, but only on the condition that he should remain there as long as he could. For the king himself was not strong and not very able to govern his kingdom. Sigurd accepted this condition, but added that he would have to get leave to go home again to his own country when he heard news of his father's death. After Sigurd married the princess and helped his father-in-law to govern the kingdom, he and the princess loved each other dearly. And after a year, a son came to them, who was 2 years old, when word came to Sigurd that his father was dead. Sigurd now prepared to return home with his wife and child and went on board ship to go by sea. They had sailed for several days, when the breeze suddenly fell and there came a dead calm at a time when they needed only 1 day's voyage to reach home. Sigurd and his queen were one day on deck when most of the others on the ship had fallen asleep. There they sat and talked for a while, and had their little son along with them. After a time, Sigurd became so heavy with sleep that he could no longer keep awake. So he went down below deck and lay down, leaving the queen alone on the deck playing with her son. A good while after Sigurd had gone below, the queen saw something black on the sea, which seemed to be coming nearer. As it approached, she could make out that it was a boat, and could see the figure of someone sitting in it and rowing it. At last, the boat came alongside the ship, and now the queen saw that it was a stone boat, out of which there came on board the shape of a fearfully ugly witch. The queen was more frightened than words can describe, and could neither speak a word nor move from the place, so as to awaken the king or the sailors. The witch came right up to the queen, took the child from her, and laid it on the deck. Then she took the queen and stripped her of all her fine clothes, which she proceeded to put on herself, and looked then like a human being. Last of all, she took the queen, put her into the boat, and said,
"And this spell I lay upon you, that you slacken not your course until you come to my brother in the underworld."
The queen sat stunned and motionless, but the boat at once shot away from the ship with her, and before long, she was out of sight. When the boat could no longer be seen, the child began to cry. And though the witch tried to quiet it, she could not manage it. So, with the child on her arm, she went below to where the king was sleeping and awakened him, scolding him for leaving them alone on the deck while he and all the crew were asleep. It was great carelessness of him, she said, to leave no one to watch the ship with her. Sigurd was greatly surprised to hear his queen scold him so much, for she had never said an angry word to him before. But he thought it was quite excusable in this case, and tried to quiet the child along with her, but it was no use. Then he went and wakened the sailors, and bade them hoist the sails, for a breeze had sprung up and was blowing straight toward the harbor. They soon reached the land which Sigurd was to rule over, and found all the people sorrowful for the old king's death. But they became glad when they got Sigurd back to the court and made him king over them. The king's son, however, hardly ever stopped crying from the time he had been taken from his mother on the deck of the ship, although he had always been such a good child before, so that at last the king had to get a nurse for him, one of the maids of the court. As soon as the child got into her charge, he stopped crying and behaved as well as before. After the sea voyage, it seemed to the king that the queen had altered very much in many ways, and not for the better. He thought her much more haughty and stubborn and difficult to deal with than she used to be. Before long, others began to notice this as well. In the court, there were two young fellows, one of 18 years old, the other of 19, who were very fond of playing chess and often sat long inside playing at it. Their room was next to the queen's, and often during the day they heard the queen talking. One day, they paid more attention than usual when they heard her talk and put their ears close to a crack in the wall between the rooms and heard the queen say quite plainly,
When I yawn a little, then I am a nice little maiden. When I yawn halfway, then I am a half troll. And when I yawn fully, then I am a troll altogether.
As she said this, she yawned tremendously, and in a moment had put on the appearance of a fearfully ugly troll. Then there came up through the floor of the room a three-headed giant with a trough full of meat, who saluted her as his sister and set down the trough before her. She began to eat out of it and never stopped till she had finished it. The young fellows saw all this going on, but did not hear the two of them say anything to each other. They were astonished, though, at how greedily the queen devoured the meat and how much she ate of it, and were no longer surprised that she took so little when she sat at table with the king. As soon as she had finished it, the giant disappeared with the trough by the same way as he had come, and the queen returned to her human shape. Now we must go back to the king's son, after he had been put in charge of the nurse. One evening, after she had lit a candle and was holding the child, several planks sprang up in the floor of the room, and out at the opening came a beautiful woman dressed in white, with an iron belt round her waist, to which was fastened an iron chain that went down into the ground. The woman came up to the nurse, took the child from her, and pressed it to her breast. Then she gave it back to the nurse and returned by the same way as she had come, and the floor closed over her again. Although the woman had not spoken a single word to her, the nurse was very much frightened, but told no one about it. Next evening, the same thing happened again, just as before. But as the woman was going away, she said in a sad tone,
Two are gone, and only one is left.
and then disappeared as before. The nurse was still more frightened when she heard the woman say this, and thought that perhaps some danger was hanging over the child, though she had no ill opinion of the unknown woman, who, indeed, had behaved toward the child as if it were her own. The most mysterious thing was the woman saying, "And only one is left." But the nurse guessed that this must mean that only one day was left, since she had come for 2 days already. At last, the nurse made up her mind to go to the king. She told him the whole story and asked him to be present in person the next day, about the time when the woman usually came. The king promised to do so, and came down to the nurse's room a little before the time and sat down on a chair with his drawn sword in his hand. Soon after, the planks in the floor sprang up as before, and the woman came up, dressed in white with the iron belt and chain. The king saw at once that it was his own queen, and immediately hewed asunder the iron chain that was fastened to the belt. This was followed by such noises and crashings down in the earth that all the king's palace shook, so that no one expected anything else than to see every bit of it shaken to pieces. At last, the noises and shaking stopped, and they began to come to themselves again. The king and queen embraced each other, and she told him the whole story, how the witch came to the ship when they were asleep and sent her off in the boat. After she had gone so far that she could not see the ship, she sailed on through darkness until she landed beside a three-headed giant. The giant wished her to marry him, but she refused, whereupon he shut her up by herself and told her how she would never get free until she consented. After a time, she began to plan how to get her freedom, and at last told him that she would consent if he would allow her to visit her son on Earth 3 days on end. This he agreed to, but put on her this iron belt and chain, the other end of which he fastened around his own waist. And the great noises that were heard when the king cut the chain must have been caused by the giants falling down the underground passage when the chain gave way so suddenly. The giant's dwelling indeed was right under the palace, and the terrible shakings must have been caused by him in his death throes. The king now understood how the queen he had had for some time past had been so ill-tempered. He at once had a sack drawn over her head and made her to be stoned to death, and after that torn in pieces by untamed horses. The two young fellows also told now what they had heard and seen in the queen's room, for before this they had been afraid to say anything about it on account of the queen's power. The real queen was now restored to all her dignity and was beloved by all. The nurse was married to a nobleman, and the king and queen gave her splendid presents.
The end.
I sure hope you enjoyed today's tale. I sure did. What a story of intrigue, drama, and adventure. What stuck out to me was the quick decision-making by the king to swiftly cut the chain that imprisoned his wife. This made me think about soldiers in combat, or when a person is in an emergency situation. Often, when one is faced with tough choices in a very stressful situation, it is difficult to make a decision and they freeze, which usually leads to a bad outcome. I remember from my army days, we were trained to make quick decisions. The idea that any decision is better than freezing was drilled into us. If the king had not acted so quickly, his wife may have been dragged back into the underworld, and he may have never had another opportunity to save her. So, if you find yourself in an emergency, don't freeze. Think about what you can do and do it. That's all for now. Until next time, I am Sir Bradley Hasse. Be brave, be loyal, and speak the truth. Now for you parents out there, I want you to understand why we are doing this, what we are trying to achieve, and how you can help us. This is a rescue operation to preserve the classics and the wisdom within before it is lost forever. Our goal is to inspire children with a love of good reading by safeguarding and breathing new life into the greatest stories in history, and empower you, the parents, with a resource you can trust to enrich your child's mind and spirit. We don't want these stories and the wisdom within to be forgotten, so our children don't have to learn these lessons on their own. The most important thing you can do for us is to spread the message and tell others about these stories and what we are doing. If you want to donate, we would love that as well. My promise is that 100% of donations will go to building the impact and quality of the Junior Classics. If you have feedback and thoughts on how we can do things better, please send an email to juniorclassicspodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening to the Junior Classics.
And now a piece titled Sigurd, after the legendary Norse character, by our friends at World and Fantasy Music.